Morning. We're here on a beautiful morning here in Brooklyn, New York, and my name's Lachlan Arts, and I want to take this opportunity to give a recap of the trip that I recently made to the Bonn Climate Change Conference that the United Nations sponsored. I went there really as simply an ordinary citizen, and or as a member of how I've known it to become known is a member of civil society. And I didn't really know what I was going to do in terms of a plan other than I was going to get into the conference. And so to get into the conference, I was sponsored by an NGO, non-government organization, known as Sustain Us, capital US. And so they sponsored me, and that's how I was able to get into the conference. And then my strategy was to go as far into the heart of the matter of that conference, that convening, to go as far into the heart of it as I could, to get as close to the center of the action that I could possibly get, and then simply look and see what was happening. So not with any particular bias, not with any kind of axe to grind, point to prove, agenda to support, but simply to go as an ordinary citizen and find out what's actually happening, how this whole thing is playing out. And the Bonn Climate Conference was an important meeting because there were 10 days of negotiations, and those 10 days of negotiations comprised half of the total of 20 days of negotiations that there are this year, and culminating in the conference in Paris in December, where once again all of the countries will convene, and actually the intent is that they will walk away from the conference in Paris with a global agreement for what each country is going to be committing to in their reduction of greenhouse gases. So that's kind of how I went in, and I was there with a very good colleague of mine. His name's Joe Robertson from the Citizens Climate Lobby, who's been just very much a resource, a support, a partner, again, in simply my mission to investigate this matter of climate change, what's happening, where we're headed, what's predictable, and what can be done to mitigate the situation. And so you go to this conference. It's this huge conference in Bonn. All the countries are there. This is an amazing conference center that they've built in Bonn, specifically for these kinds of meetings. So it has those, huge rooms that are round, like the ones you see on television, and there's, all the seats, and then, the signs, United States, Uganda, European Union, and, everyone's sitting there, and, it's just very, 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 very moving and very impressive to actually be in the room, literally with the entire world. And some of the meetings were closed, which means people in my category called observers. This was I don't know if you can see this or not, but this was the badge that I got. And very proud of this. So I basically would sit in the meetings and I would watch what is going on. And of course, I had my opinions that were happening as I was watching, but I'm, pretty good at keeping my opinions separate, so I can just kind of stay with what's actually happening. And then I would, something would strike me in the meeting, or a comment that someone said, or a particular delegate, and then once the meeting was over, I would go up to that delegate and say, hi, my name's Lachlan Arts. I'm, not really here representing anybody. I'm just a member of civil society, and I came over to find out for myself what's actually happening, and would it be possible for us to have a conversation? I also went over at times in the context of context news. And sometimes that was a good angle, and say, would I be able to interview you? And I got some, interviews that we actually did that we posted on the Context News site through the conference. But the point being that I got to have these conversations with people during the breaks, before the conference happened, after the conference was happening, and some of the receptions that they had. And that's what I found to be most valuable. One of the groups that I really wanted to get in with was the United States delegation. And because clearly the United States is, possibly the main player in this whole deal, certainly one of the top three with China and the EU. And just wanted to find out what was actually happening. And so I got, over the series of a few requests, conversations, got to have several conversations with the gentleman who is in charge of the entire United States delegation. We also had this project that we have called the Paris Pledge that was also in the mix of all this. And the Paris Pledge is an opportunity for members of civil society to impact the climate negotiation process. And one of the things that we are standing for is a global commitment to full decarbonization by 2050. And so that was very, very much at the forefront of much of the negotiations, where people would bringing up, well, what's going to be happening in terms of the negotiations, or the way that, I know I'm jumping around a bit, but the way the process works is that countries submit their individual INDCs, which is the intended national declared contributions. And it's kind of a looser way of saying what they're pledging, what they're committing to, but they're not using the word pledge or commitment. So I had the opportunity to be in an NGO briefing that the United States delegation conducted, and that was for anyone from a non-government organization. So those are organizations like Greenpeace, the National Wildlife Fund, all of those NGOs that had representatives at the conference, and including the NGO that I was there being sponsored by, Sustain Us. And so there's about 20 of us in the room, and I'm sitting across from the man who's in charge of the United States delegation. And came time for questions, and anytime it was time for a question in this conference and I was allowed to ask, or someone in my category was allowed to ask, I took the opportunity and asked a question. And the question that I asked was, I said, well, the United States, the INDC that the United States has submitted calls for somewhere between 80 to 83% decarbonization by 2050, not 100%. And with that pledge staying as is, that is not a sufficient reduction to keep us from blasting past the 2-degree limit that has been set, which says, we've got to stay within the 2-degree increase from pre-industrial temperature limit to actually stay safe. Now, other thing about that is that it's definitely a overwhelming consensus that the 2-degree limit is way too high. In fact, even the gentleman that first proposed the 2 degrees has retracted it and said that it's way too high. 2 degrees is not safe. We have got to stay that what the maximum temperature increase is 1.5. We're already at 0.8, between 0.8 and 0.9, and you can see all the things that are already happening. So almost doubling that, which is 1.5, definitely, we do not want to go above that. And the United States pledge, the United States INDC definitely has us blast way beyond 1.5. And so my question was, what does the United States have set up in this spirit of transparency and review? What kind of a structure does the United States have set up to allow for people such as myself, other members of civil society, to be engaged in the policy process between now and when the final INDC is submitted by the United States? And the response I got was very simple. The response was none. But again, good to find out what's happening. So there's no opportunity right now for anyone other than who's already participating in the process to get engaged in the policy process that the United States has. So pretty much how it was said to me is that the INDC that the United States has submitted is what they're going to take to Paris. Oh, and then I said, well, there's no process at all. I mean, what's the review process? And he said he looked around the room and he said, well, this meeting, for example, this meeting is an opportunity for you to be engaged. And I thought, well, okay, but I mean, this is it. I mean, this is 20 people here. This is the entire opportunity for the civil society engagement in the United States. If I'd have known that, I'd have invited more people. I mean, this is, it was kind of funny, but again, good to get the facts. In a conversation, I got to be in a briefing with the co-chairs, and so there was, I don't know, maybe a room with maybe 50 people in it, something like that, and Ahmed and Dan were, in the front, obviously, as the co-chairs, and it came time for, questions, and, I raised my hand, of course, and that's the other thing. I was there, and it's potentially very intimidating because these people are just, they've got people have like tons of degrees, and they've been, the secretary of this and the treasurer of this and the, chief counsel to the, I mean, they're just like big deal people. And I don't have any of those credentials. But what I do have, and what I really discovered as my worth in the thing, is that what I can do is I can talk. And I can be in a meeting or in a conversation, and there is something that I can say that does alter the whole tone of what's happening. And an example of that is this meeting that I was in with the co-chairs. The question I asked was, what is it that we can do for you? So I'm here as a member, as a representative of civil society, and I want to know from you as the United Nations, you as the UNFCCC, what is it that civil society can do to empower you and make sure that you're successful in the fulfillment of your mission? And what requests do you have of us? And you could tell that it wasn't a question they were used to getting. And so they kind of thought for a while and then said, well, I don't know, we really have to think about this. And the one thing they said, well, that you're here makes a difference. That you're here and that you're in the mix of all this. People see that you're in the meetings, they hear your participation, and it really does alter the whole tone of the negotiations and kind of puts us, gives us a level of what we're accountable for that I think wouldn't be there if you weren't here. And then, didn't really get much else from that other than that they would consider, kind of consider the question. And then at the end of the meeting, Ahmed came over to me and he took my hand and he looked me right in the eyes and he said, help us do this. It was from Ahmed to Lachlan, yes, but it was also from one of the two people accountable for this entire process speaking to civil society. And that's really the charge that I took away from this, is what can we as civil society do to bridge the gap between where we're predictably headed and what needs to happen? And I'm saying that is civil society's gap. That is our gauntlet to pick up. That is our charge. And as civil society, it's up to us to make this happen. So, thank you for that. I know it was kind of a lengthy deal, but again, you can, compared to the 11 days that I was there, and most of which in a suit and tie, not that bad, right? So, just thank you for the opportunity to be there. Thank you for the opportunity to be with you in the matter of this critical issue, and let's get to work.